No problem. Thank you so much. I'm gonna start off and let you introduce yourself um, to my listeners, and then we're gonna get started with the interview. You could, you could start.
Oh, okay. Hello, my name is Alan Newton. I'm a exoneree from the Innocence Project. I've been home 12 years now after serving 22 years for crimes I did not commit.
Can I say? I was gonna say. I always ask everybody, pull your mic up to you.
Yeah.
It moves,
Okay.
and so you speak right into the mic so we can hear you. I'm
Yep.
sorry. I
No,
do
that's
this.
okay.
I do this every week.
That's
so.
okay.
Like, kind of intimidating.
Hi, my name is Amshala Jairam. I'm a state policy advocate with the Innocence Project, so we work on changing the laws.
And I'm Susan Friedman. I'm a staff attorney at the Innocence Project, and so we represent people who are seeking relief from wrongful conviction.
And thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here. This topic is very important to me. And I remember meeting Shonda at the Shonda Smith, who is a communications manager for Innocence Project. I met her at Anthony Graves' book signing release that he did, and just hearing his story, you know, I heard about people being wrongfully accused of crimes and being in prison and not being able to tell their story and get out, and they have to start all over again. And it's hard because, one, you've been away for so long, the world changed,
Definitely.
and you have to come out and get readjusted to everything that's going on. But then you have the public or society that just, well, that's not my issue. You know, stuff happens and things like that. And I always said, there's more to it. It's so much in this world going on that people don't know that I think is very important to talk about. And I'm definitely thankful for you coming in to tell your story.
We appreciate you for having us here because
problem.
it's important to be able to tell our story because, like you said, with the change in news cycle every day, it's hard for people to really concentrate on things that really don't affect them personally.
Right, exactly.
So getting this opportunity to tell the story, speaking the young people going out to the colleges and reminding people, look, this is all of us, because the way I try to express it, even though it don't affect us, because it doesn't involve somebody with you personally, it affects public safety. Because when wrongful person is locked up and convicted, the person that commit the crime, the majority of the time, they go on to commit a new crime,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Exactly. I had someone here September 1st from Just Leadership USA, and she was also, her name is Tamika Graham, and she mentioned that. And she also mentioned how a person that's wrongfully accused, now they have to adjust to a lifestyle in prison where if they wasn't criminals when they walked in, now they are criminals because now they have to learn how to survive,
Right.
and because of the things that go on
You're classified.
inside. Exactly.
I also used to say you had to make the normal things, the abnormal things, normal now. And you have to adjust to things, and it's the same adjustment, unfortunately, that we have to go through when we come home, because like you said, if you was duly convicted and you come home on parole, the state is obligated to assist you in making that transition easier. But in our cases, one of the things the state is almost out to get us, because they don't want the transition to be easy, because they want to try to say, well, look at this person, even though they was wrongfully convicted, look at them now, they're
Right.
not improving themselves. And so they kind of have a real hands-off policy, and it shows when they actually fight in the civil cases when men and women try to get compensated for them wrongful convictions.
Right. We're gonna come back to your story because I have so many questions for you.
Thank you.
I want to go over to my guest from the Innocence Project. Could you say your name one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure, Amshala Jairam.
Thank you. And Susan.
Yes, Susan Friedman.
Yes. Could you tell everyone a little bit more about Innocence Project and how when the organization got started and, you know, the meaning behind it?
Sure. So the Innocence Project was started in 1992, and it was founded by Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck. And they realized at that time, it was when DNA started to be used in prosecutions. And what they realized is that if DNA can prove that someone committed a crime, it could also prove what they believed, which is that there are wrongfully incarcerated people in prison all across the United States. And so they began this project, and it originally started at Cardozo Law School as a clinic, and it was just 2 professors and a handful of students. And then in 2004, it became an independent nonprofit, although we still have a relationship with Cardozo and run a legal clinic.
Right.
And now we've grown to a staff of, I think we're about around 80 people. And we also are part of an Innocence network, which is 56 organizations nationwide and 12 organizations abroad that seek to prevent wrongful convictions.
That's great. That is really, really great. I love hearing organizations that's all about helping people. I love it. I truly love it. Also, what are the most common causes of wrongful convictions?
Sure. So some of the leading factors for the cases that were overturned with DNA, we're now up to 357 DNA-based exonerations. And I say that because there's thousands of others that were other folks who were exonerated through other means, not through DNA. But for our cases, the leading factors are like in Allen's case, an eyewitness misidentification, false confessions where a confession was coerced or whatever the case may be, jailhouse informants. So there are the informants that are actually incarcerated that will give information in exchange for, like leniency in their sentence or, even like a better living situation within the prison.
Wow.
And there, and it is actually a totally unregulated process that we know very little about. So that's another big issue. Trying to think what else I'm missing. Flawed forensic evidence. That's one that's come more and more to the fore.
Wasn't a woman arrested recently who was tampering with DNA evidence, and people was getting locked away because of it for a very long time? I forgot her name.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the case. She was actually tampering with drug testing.
Okay.
And she was actually making the drugs, everything just test positive and for law enforcement advantages. I think it was Chicago. But that's only, I think it was a Houston case also where you had a lab technician that was tampering with evidence. So it's multiple cases that involves that, unfortunately.
I know she was caught and she also was punished for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But that doesn't happen often, right?
No, it does not.
No.
And,
right.
and it does not happen to the law enforcement officers that a lot of times, purging themselves, submit false evidence, and false documents, and no one is held accountable. And because, one of the things, like I talk about these wrongful convictions is, I believe it's still happening today because the prosecutors nowadays are still reluctant to deal with cases that happened when they wasn't even in office. And when you have that type of pushback from them, it's my belief because they truly know that these behaviors and wrongful convictions are still happening because they get cases where they just believe people are guilty and they just run with it, and they have to accept it, the cases they get from the police department. And this is why I talk about it. New York City has not had another DNA exoneration since 2006, since my case. And part of the reason, I believe, is when I was fighting my civil compensation case, the federal judge told the city when they was trying to get the case dismissed, the only reason we're here today is because y'all found evidence.
Right.
So it's like a message. If y'all don't find any more evidence, nobody else won't get exonerated.
Is that the again, I learned from my last guest that was here. Are you speaking about the discovery kit?
Well, speaking about basically just finding evidence in general. The discovery statute is a whole nother issue. I think New York State may have just passed a new law in regards to discovery because that's one of the major issues why people get convicted, whether wrongfully or rightfully, that you don't have access to the evidence against you. I mean, give you a perfect example. You can be suing somebody for $50 and you can learn everything about them. Whereas you can be facing 50 years in jail and you won't learn some of the evidence before you sit down in court that particular day to start the trial.
They could actually, that's crazy. They could actually do that. Like, I withhold evidence from you from.
It's a process. Well, they may say, well, you're trying to intimidate a witness, or, I mean, it's just a discovery process that's broken in New York State. Other states really have a lot more liberal process as far as allowing you access, but when you compare it to the civil process, where you can get access to everything just because you're suing somebody for monetary damages, it's completely different when you're facing years or life in prison.
Oh man.
It doesn't help that a lot of people don't know their rights, and a lot of people can't afford a qualified attorney. You know what I'm saying? Like what they call public defenders, the
Yeah,
public
yeah.
that work for the state.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And their job is just to clear as many of these cases as possible. They're not your best interest is not necessarily at hand there. So it's hard to fight something you don't know that you have the rights to fight, and you don't know your rights. You don't know what your rights are.
Even though you may be able to find some great public defenders, but if they handling 35 cases all
That
at
too,
one time,
right.
that automatically presents an issue right there, because they running around back and forth,
Right.
and the fact that they getting so much pushback. Because if you was handling 35 cases and everything was fair, it may be different when it comes to wrongful convictions. You wouldn't have these many cases, but because the process is not fair, it's so adversary, that causes the problem, though,
Oh man.
or one of the problems.
It's you try to get to one layer, but then when you start talking, there's so many different layers that you have to unravel. And my question for the Innocence Project, as I asked AJ, from everything that you see on a daily basis and trying to help people get exonerated, how do you stay in a mental space to, say, this is my job, I can't let this, overwhelm me, because things like that can start to affect your health and, as AJ said, your spirituality at times. How do you stay afloat, because I know even though you may not try to take it personal, you take it personal.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of us at the Innocence Project, we do this work because we truly believe in the organization's mission, and we want to make a difference. And it's hard to not have things impact you and to leave things in the office. Like I'm sure Amshala can't leave things in the office, and I certainly can't, and I know none of my colleagues can, but it's really important to try to find time for yourself and kind of understand that if you burn out, you're no good to anybody else. So it's
Absolutely.
really important to have a good sense of what your limits are and when it's time to take a step back and take some time for yourself. And the organization is really supportive with work-life balance and making sure that we do take care of ourselves as much as we can, because we're no good to anybody if we're exhausted
Right.
and stressed out all the time.
And I could imagine you work around the clock just about too. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah. Oh man.
It also helps when you have your own support system, your
Yeah.
husband, your wife, your family. They can be your center for you. You know what I mean? So that helps a lot. I mean, and not everybody has that, but I mean, when you have that, that's an extra, a bonus.
Right. Okay. Oh man. And to the Innocence Project, what do you look for when you choose cases to work on? Because I know it's like so many that come across your desk. Are there any like specific points that you look for where you say, okay, I'm going to jump into this one?
Yeah, so the way we accept cases is through the intake department. So people who are incarcerated or their loved ones write letters to us, and those letters go to our intake department, which has just a tremendous job. First, due to the volume, the amount of
Right.
letters and requests that we get, but also just how difficult it is to read these letters from people who have no legal representation and are coming to us, and we may be their last opportunity to get assistance. And so what they do is they start a very tedious process of, reading trial transcripts and trying to get to the heart of whether or not there is biological evidence, whether or not there is DNA evidence that was left at the crime scene that if we exclude the client from, then we can say that the client is actually innocent. And so in most instances, we're looking at cases where it's a sexual assault or a violent crime, or there was a violent struggle, or there is, a logical inference that if the client is excluded from this piece of evidence, we know that he or she could not have committed this crime.
Right. Were there ever times where you were part of a case and it's possible Innocence Project wasn't able to actually help someone get exonerated and you would pass the case on to someone else to, like another organization to help? Or
Yeah, so, obviously we get a lot of requests and we can't accommodate all of them. We can't take all those cases on. And there are also, so at some points we have to make referrals. And sometimes we make referrals to some of our network partners or to other lawyers in the cities or the states
Right.
where these convictions occurred. But also even when we accept cases, the first step for us if we're looking for biological evidence is to find the evidence.
Right.
And not all the evidence exists. And
how
so
long
there,
does it normally take to find the evidence, especially if it's a case going back?
well, it's a case by case process, so I can't say
Right.
definitively how long.
Right.
But today we have much better ways of tracking evidence. Back in the 60s, 70s,
yeah.
and 80s, it wasn't
Right.
it wasn't computerized. There weren't barcodes scanning everything, and so really evidence could be almost anywhere. We could have evidence in the courthouse, evidence in a prosecutor's desk, evidence at the sheriff's office, evidence at the lab. Sometimes the court reporters maintained evidence, and so the lawyers start this very lengthy process of trying to track down the evidence. And that, sometimes you get lucky. You pick up the phone, you call a lab, and they put in the number, and they say, "Oh yeah, we got this number." And then there are other times you look at Al Newton's case, and the search takes much longer than it actually should have.
Yeah. Oh man. AJ, you have questions that you want?
No, I want to ask, I know when people call Black Westchester, usually where you've exhausted every other thing that you can, nowhere else to go, we're the person that you call because you don't have nowhere else to go. But being a small staff, I don't have the manpower that you have. There's a lot of times there's people's parents that have called me about their children being wrongfully incarcerated, and no parent thinks that their kid did what they did. So sometimes their kid actually did. I don't have time to vet all of these situations. Sometimes it bothers me because you just can't help everybody. Do y'all experience it? I mean, like I said, y'all have a lot more manpower though. Do y'all experience that, and how do y'all deal with that?
So I think kind of going back to the evidence searches, for example, there are times where we know the only way we can prove someone's innocence is if we find that biological evidence. And there are times when we go through evidence searches for years and we come to learn that the evidence has been destroyed, and at that point we have no way forward. And so that's certainly probably one of the most difficult things for me, I can say personally, is closing a case where there really is no resolution one way or another because we haven't been able to find the evidence. And I know that's true for a lot of my colleagues. So we certainly face those obstacles and those roadblocks, and they're probably the most difficult cases that come across my desk.
Oh.
My family and I, we kind of experienced that also in my request seeking assistance, having my brothers, knock on doors, make
Right.
phone calls. Sometimes we used to get somebody come in and they, promise us this and then won't accept any more phone calls. So I used to just tell my family, look, move on, because, I'm not going to give up, because it was about not trying to put too much hope in things, because I was filing motions on a regular basis. I got my feelings, I was joyful when I put the motions in, and when they got denied, I got depressed. But, I had the opportunity to keep moving forward, so a lot of times I had to express that to my family. Look, just keep going on. Don't worry about it. We're not going to hold it against people because, like AJ said, a lot of times people was overwhelmed and, and a lot of people was reaching out. I was doing legal work upstate too, so I understood the process. So it made it a little more easier for me not to be so disappointed, because I wasn't able to get that assistance that I was, I expected, because I reached out to some of my representatives also, and it was like the doors was closed, and it was like, okay, let's just move on.
I appreciate the fact that you did some of the work, because sometimes a parent or someone will call me and there's no work done, and then the time and energy I have to take to research the situation, and all of them are not righteous situations.
Right.
Sometimes I don't have the time to even invest. Like you have to bring me something. You know what I'm saying? I don't
Right,
have time to
right.
get to that point to see
Right.
if it's a worthwhile situation.
Right.
So I tell people that, and then I
So-
never get nothing from them.
When someone reach out to you or the Innocence Project to help someone that's in a situation that you was in, what are some of the things that they could bring to you to give you a heads up on, to help you move through to try and help the individual?
Well, I was trying to show people that I was innocent. One of the things I was always asking for was the DNA evidence. Let's try to find the DNA evidence, because 4 years after I got convicted, they actually found the rape kit. I was charged with a sexual assault. They found the rape kit. It was sent to the medical examiner's office to be tested. Now, I heard the testimony in trial. The woman said she was assaulted. She felt something wet running down, so it was biological evidence. But after 4 years, they tested the evidence and they said it wasn't any biological evidence. So I was still harping on that even after I got that decision years later. So I was harping on that. I was harping on the fact that it was a misidentification case. I was in a different borough, had alibi witnesses. So having that, paperwork to be able to show people this is what I was doing, this is where I'm at, it made it a little easier for people maybe to open the door. But a lot of times the door got slammed, but it was about being persistent. Because I hired attorneys, I paid some money, and we filed some motions, and then motions was dropped. And I was told a lot of times that nobody wanted to deal with my case. I don't know what that meant, but lawyers was taking some money sometime and not doing work. And so, like I said earlier, I just, instructed my family, let's move on and just try to find the next, opening where we can get our foot in the door in the courts.
Right. I was invited to see a screening by Shonda, Crown Heights.
Great.
And I was like, the whole time I was trying not to cry, but I did cry because, just to be walking down the street and you're pulled away and put in a police car and you're being told you committed a crime that you didn't commit. And you're like, wait, what's going on? All I did was go to the corner store. How am I in this situation now? And when we was able to see time just go by of him fighting to try and get out, and sitting in front of the parole officers, and they're saying denied and denied and denied, and I forgot the character, Carl was his name, and every time he was sitting in front of the parole officers, he accumulated a lot of good credentials while he was in prison, but then they tried to demean his character every time he was sitting in front of them. Like,
as long as you don't accept responsibility for the crime that you're convicted of, because regardless of your argument, once you're convicted, they want you to show remorse and take responsibility. And he had a violent offense. He was charged with a homicide. I was charged with a sexual assault. So you see, it doesn't matter the nature of the offense that you charge with. Some people charge with drug offenses and refuse to take any type of drug programming because their argument is, I don't have anything to do with this offense. I don't have anything to do with that crime. And that causes a catch-22 situation, because legally the parole board cannot release you if you do not address programming that's in reference to the nature of your offense. So going to the parole board, like the character in that, I went to the parole board 3 times, and 3 times I got denied, and the 4th time I was planning not even going, because it was like, look, they cannot release me. I mean, even though I had college degrees while I was in there, I went to school, I had a bunch of different vocational programming, but their argument was, as long as you refuse to take responsibility for this offense, we can't release you. Now, I know some people that was wrongfully convicted that took the programming, and a lot of times they still was denied release by the parole board.
so it's almost like they trick you then. Like,
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is just based on, whatever Albany was deciding, because even though you sat before 3 people making the decision, the final decision really came out of Albany, though.
Right. Oh. AJ, any more? You have any?
I mean, I have a lot to say, but I'm trying not to
ahead, go
dominate
ahead.
the show. I mean, it's the whole system. Well, once you understand that the system was created to hold you back and not to help you. I mean, once you get that in your mind, you go into realistic expectations. You know what I'm saying? Like, we think, oh, well, the system is supposed to. It's not designed for that. Like,
Definitely not.
I mean, you have judges, like we were saying. We got judges that are invested in the privatized system. Prison is big business. Lots of people are making lots of money. They don't worry about programs to rehabilitate you when you get out, because it's set up for you to go back in.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's we have to understand that one. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not fair. People are like, oh, it's not fair. Yes, that's something my mother told me I was 5. The world is just not fair. You know what I'm saying? You have to understand that, because there's a lot of people disillusioned. You know, that if they haven't come across, they don't understand that the system is built. Like, I've interviewed almost every police commissioner and chief in Westchester County, and they all told me there's no racism in their police department, and race doesn't matter in the way they police. That's not true.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, race doesn't matter, and there's a lot of people that say there is no racism. If it doesn't affect you every day, and you don't come in contact it, it's hard for you to understand that it is. There's some people that really think things are good. Like, why are you complaining? You know, y'all had a black president. Why are you complaining? Things are not still. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We have to understand that. We have to fight. What I want to say, though, to anybody who's listening, that might come across y'all, one of the best things you can do before you approach someone like me or someone like you, do your homework.
Yeah.
We live in a time right now, like you spoke on a couple of things. I looked them up right away. You know, I was looking up the discovery thing with the law and all that. Like, do your homework. Google is a wealth of information. You can Google anything. Find out whatever the particular case is, whatever the case law is. Case law matters a lot too. That's why do you know that they try to plead you out a lot for a lot of these situations? So there's no case law. You know, but if you continue to fight, even though you're right and you win your case, there's case law. So now the people in the future can pull up your case and use that case. But if they get you to plead out or settle and, you know, police brutality suits, there's no case law.
Well, this the reason why Michelle Alexander's book, The School to Prison Pipeline, is so important, because the same things you see going on with the prison system, you see in the education systems around the country.
Absolutely.
It's like they trying to pull people out of there and keep them uneducated and just put them in the system. Because, I mean, I remember years ago, New York City was going into the high schools using the yearbooks as mugshot books. So it was like, look, if we can criminalize them at a young age, let's try to get them, because all that was going to do was cause people to be, you know, wrongfully picked out. You go and getting their yearbooks and using that as mugshot books. This was New York City, one of the biggest cities in the country, but still doing a lot of stuff that's backwards, and that's the unfortunate part. This is a democratic town, a democratic city, but a lot of times the way the government is run in this city and state is undemocratic, unfortunately.
The other thing is you can go further back than that. The standardized test.
I want to jump to Susan and Mshula, right?
Close.
Amshula. Okay. I wanted to ask also, after someone is exonerated, are you financially are you given anything financially from being wrongfully accused in your time away, or you just have to?
You got to fight. You got to fight to get paid. I mean, now I took New York City to trial. After 4 years, I won a substantial judgment, and you know it was lowered. But what that did is open the door for a lot of other exonerees that was wrongfully convicted and had to wait. I had to wait 10 years to get compensated. Now you got men and women getting compensated in 2-3 years. The process is a lot quicker because the city controller is actually taking a big step and saying, look, instead of y'all people having to file lawsuits, I'm going to start compensating y'all, settle y'all with y'all once y'all file your notice of claim, because it costs us a lot to litigate for years. And a lot of times, you know, you got the de Blasio administration, you got the Bloomberg administration before that. None of them want to recognize these wrongful conviction cases, in the city. The police department, the district attorney's office was basically doing wrong. So now the city's like taking a different approach when it comes to the controller's office in regards to settling cases. So these men and women don't have to wait 10, 15 years to try to get compensated for things they did, even though there's another statute under the Wrongful Conviction Act for the state statute, and the compensation is the same thing a lot of these men and women have to go through. You have to fight the same type of fight to prove you're innocent, even when you got DNA cases.
And when you come out, I know it probably takes time. Is this removed from your record so that when you go for a job interview, you know, things like this don't come up, especially if you didn't commit the crime? It shouldn't be on your
New York expunged the records, but like everything else, you have to make sure you stay on top of them in regards to getting it done, though, because things just don't get done. I mean, a perfect example is my DNA exoneration. New York City never put that DNA through a national database to find out who may have committed the crime. Now, even though the statute of limitations expired and the person can't get prosecuted, but they don't want any more negative. They didn't want any more negative press, any more negative publicity in regards to trying to find out who may have committed this crime. So that just go to show you, you have to always follow up with things, and you have to keep yourself educated, like AJ was saying, when it comes to knowing your rights. And I tell kids nowadays, just be quiet when you're dealing with law enforcement. Call your parents, be quiet, because anything you said is just more ammunition, unfortunately.
Like they say, it will be held against you.
Yeah. And some, it's not all, but some cops just take advantage of people that don't know their rights.
We interviewed the Central Park Five. One or two of the members have been on the show. Yusef Salam has been on the show, and his mother have been on the show several times, sitting in these seats right here. And Yusef said, they saw on TV that the cops wanted to question them. They went into the police, not knowing their rights. They went into the police department to tell the police that they didn't do it. They never went home. You know what I'm saying? It's like he said, literally, he did not understand that, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you. He did not understand that at 15. He just went in to clear his name, to let them know, because the cops were looking for him. Him and the other guy, because they picked up 2 or 3 of them, and him and another guy were left. And he said, they just went in to tell him, no, we just wanted to let you know we didn't do it. They never went home.
Never go home.
You know what I'm saying? So the other thing I wanted to say, with the piggyback off what you were saying.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
I was just going to follow up on the false confessions and the fact that we see this a lot. As Almsharla mentioned, one of the leading causes, one of the contributing factors of wrongful convictions that we see in our cases are false confessions. And in what we found in the DNA exonerations is that about 30% of those cases had some type of admission, some kind of false confession. And the fact is that decades of social science research has proved that, in fact, your innocence puts you at risk of giving a false confession. Because what you want to do is you want to be helpful. You want to tell the police everything that you know, because you have nothing to hide. And so instead of saying, I want a lawyer, you just keep telling the police, I didn't do it, and you end up in this police station for hours upon hours being interrogated. And so, in fact, your innocence puts you at risk. And also, the Central Park Five were teenagers, and what we see is that there are certain people that are more likely to give a false confession. And those are people that have that are juveniles or that have some kind of limitations, because they are more suggestible and they want to be compliant with law enforcement.
Right, because they want to go home, and they feel, if I tell you what you want to know, you'll let me go because I'm innocent.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The research shows that juveniles, they're looking for an immediate reward, and so for them, what they think is, if I just tell you what you want to hear, I'll leave this room, because they're just thinking about what's happening in the here and now, and not realizing, if I admit to a crime, I'm never going home, probably.
Right.
I think what's interesting about false confessions too is that certainly juveniles are more vulnerable, but everybody is vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Like, anybody can break and give a false confession. And I think the reality is that you don't come into the world thinking that everybody is out to get you, right? So there is like a certain amount of natural trust that you have. In the Central Park 5 case, not only, when it came down to it, did they manufacture these confessions, but in the case of Corey Wise, I don't know if you remember, but they basically were like, why don't you just come down with your buddy to the station? So he thought he was going with his friend down to the police station because he was a sweet kid,
and that's like you just mentioned. You come into this world not thinking everyone is out to get you, but then it's like I think AJ said it earlier, when you look at reality, it's like you have to put up some type of defense for yourself, because there are people who are out to get you. I don't know if you could comment on that, what I just
Well, mean, I think one of the things that I'll say is that, you know, the Supreme Court has said that you're allowed to lie to somebody to get them to make an admission, right? So they can tell you, hey, we have your DNA at the crime scene.
And you see that a lot
And
too.
that's pretty scary. You're like, well, what do you mean you have my DNA? I wasn't there. And all of a sudden you feel like there's no way out. If they're telling me my DNA is there, if they're telling me they have a fingerprint there, you feel like maybe I did it, maybe, you know, and that's what we see a lot of times. Like,
Right.
It's amazing.
They start making you think maybe I actually did do the crime and I don't remember. You know,
Yeah, there was
It's a
one
mental game.
There was one guy, Michael Crow, who was 14 years old, and his sister was killed, and he was interrogated for 27 hours over 3 days. And by the end of this, I mean, you can Google it and see some of these interrogation clips of him. But at the end of it, he truly came to believe that he murdered his sister. And it wasn't until the DNA was tested that they found the true perpetrator.
And even sometimes when they have an idea that the person is innocent, they keep pushing forward. They keep pushing forward because it would give the actual perpetrator, if they catch this person, doubt like, hey, y'all had somebody, you had them
Right.
locked up for 6 months and then y'all let them go once y'all found out. And so this is why they just, like a dog with a bone, even sometime when they find out the evidence is going left, different from, you know,
what they actually saying you do it. You
right.
did.
They just keep going with it. This
Why
is why.
do
I think that
people go ahead?
I think that, you know, what Alan was saying earlier too is like really at the heart of the matter. Like we have an adversarial system, and everybody understands incentives, right?
Right.
And everybody in the system is unfortunately incentivized, you know, on the law enforcement and prosecution side to identify someone and convict someone.
Mhm.
And until and unless that changes, unless we are rewarded for seeking truth, or, you know, even identifying someone but then saying, no, you know what, I made a mistake, until that happens, until and unless that happens, then we're going to continue to see these kinds of, you know, people being railroaded into prison.
How do we, okay, so when you have a detective or a police officer that's wrongfully accusing someone, and then in time you find out the person that they accused wasn't the correct person, how do, like, what type of punishment or anything are they given? Because a lot of times we see people just walk away, and you have people that are the detectives that keep doing the same thing, and that can cause mass incarceration also, people in there for things they didn't do by certain detectives.
Absolutely.
And what can we do to like bring those people, you know, to be punished for what they're doing? Because you're interfering with people's livelihoods, you're taking people away from their families. You may have someone who is some type of athlete, and they have scholarships to go to college or to be a doctor, and you're interfering with their livelihood. And when they come out, it's hard to get back on track because your image been tarnished, everything you have has gone away, and it's hard for you to start over. So is there, like, what can we do to try and find a way to stop this, if there's anything that we could do?
Well, I think the community is already starting to change the landscape on that. I think for a long time, and so police have what's called qualified immunity. So it's not total immunity, like prosecutors have complete immunity. Police have qualified immunity. So I guess there are some, you know, there are some exceptions where they can be held accountable for their actions. I think, you know, New York City has certainly made attempts, right? That's the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, that is supposed to oversee and investigate incidents of police misconduct. But, you know, I think to date, most of these attempts have failed. So I think what is succeeding is, you know, Shonda was mentioning earlier that you guys have had Eric Garner's family on the show, you know, and other folks like that, is really like the community's coming up and saying, you know, enough is enough, and we want to see some justice. Actually in Kentucky, there was a detective who's we know has contributed to at least 2 wrongful convictions, probably more, who's actually been indicted now. So I think, slowly but surely things are
Right.
starting to change. The other thing I would say to your listeners is that they need to get out and vote.
Right.
And not just for the federal presidential elections, but for your
Local.
for your DA,
Yeah, local
right?
levels.
For your city council, for your mayor, because the only way that we can hold them accountable is by telling them, you know what, you're going to lose your job now.
Right. And I think also a lot of times people are afraid to say things because as in the movie Crown Heights, where the detective went after someone who was being he said, I could deport you if you don't say what I want you to say. So a lot of people are afraid to come forward and speak up when they know someone is being wrongfully accused of a crime. So
And the
Oh,
real
I'm sorry.
power lay with a lot of those judges because it starts at the top, and I believe this is the
Right.
reason why nobody's held responsible. Because the judges allowed perjured testimony, they allowed all type of stuff in the courtroom to go on. They see it firsthand. They experience it. They know. I mean, you gotta. The conviction and integrity unit now investigating a particular cop in Brooklyn, and they got over a dozen cases that he was involved in. The same witness that he was always bringing into court, witnessing multiple homicides in Brooklyn. So it was known through the court system that this cop was doing this stuff, and them judges was allowing this testimony to be put before juries on a regular basis. So until those judges start being held responsible, nobody else, because judges can make referrals.
Yes.
There was a cop that really just got indicted because he committed perjury in a federal gun case. And this is why he got indicted. He got indicted in the federal system. But as far as one of these district attorneys in New York City indicting a cop for perjury, unless you got it on tape, and even though they lie about people confessing, and then DNA evidence show that this person could not have confessed to a crime he didn't commit, nothing is going to happen though.
right. And you mentioned, if you don't have it on tape, but then now still, if you have stuff on tape, they still
that's right.
sweep it under the rug.
I want to talk about the voting aspect. What you just said, a lot of people vote for the president.
You're not allowed to talk about politics. So we
I was just saying the
Oh.
need to vote, though.
I can talk politics though.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm
Did you-
not talking about any
Sorry.
politicians, but what I'm
Oh.
saying, the importance of the vote is
Okay.
for your local mayor, your mayor appoints your police commissioner. You know what I'm saying? And all the commissioners, how your city is governed and regulated, it's your local mayor. People don't understand that. So if you have a problem in your police department and the mayor's not getting rid of them, you get you a new mayor. You understand what I'm saying? Those are you can affect more change in your local life, in your local elections, than you can for the president.
Oh, yeah.
The president, those local seats actually
Are
affect
very
your day to
important.
day more than the president. And that's what I just wanted to say
Yeah.
about that.
That's very
And the
important.
the other tricky thing is that judges are elected in lots of states.
I was going to say that too.
But there's very little information out there.
They're not
about
allowed.
them,
There's a lot.
know?
I've had them on the show. They're not allowed to talk about certain things. You can't ask them certain things. You know what I'm saying? But then they're asking us for a vote.
Right.
But then so you don't really get to know what their thoughts are, how they really think on certain issues. You don't. And then they're some of these are like 10 years. The
Right.
local spots, like that's the dangerous thing with those.
They have a lot of community selection committees when it comes to judges in the city, and unfortunately, a lot of people do not get involved or just don't know about the process when it comes, because you have a lot of different community organizations that actually choose and pick people to sit on these selection committees where these potential judges go talk about, their resume, who they are, what they're trying to do. But if we don't have any input in the process because of a lack of education, a lack of the process, this is why we keep falling for the same okie doke
Exactly.
as
Exactly. Oh yeah.
And I do think there's a real problem with transparency and information
Yes.
when it comes to judicial candidates. You know, I mean, we can find
yeah.
out, rightly so, we can find out a lot about our city council members or our state reps or whoever it is, but you can't find anything on the judges.
Mhm.
And they hold people's lives in their hands, and that's not right.
Right. It's like, you know, they're a judge and we know you a judge, so we're gonna pull you out of the public eye. You're just here to do this. We don't want people to know about you. Oh,
and,
yeah.
and they can't
Mhm.
speak on certain things.
Right.
Like, because I've asked them, and like I said, in this
Yeah.
very studio, and they'll be like, well, you know, we can't speak on this, and we can't speak on that. And that's the answers. But those are the answers we need to know before we vote for you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's a catch-22. And I don't know who changes that legislation, but again, that's the importance of educating ourselves, because we need to know, obviously some of that might need to be changed, so we need to know who is the people who change to make those changes,
Right.
and we need to start hollering at them.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
that's the only way you make change.
Right.
But I would point out that, I mean, Alan's absolutely right that, you know, these judges play a critical role, and they often are, you know, kind of turning a blind eye to the things that they're seeing in their courtrooms. But the people that we do know information about that we can also elect, who also have enormous power, are the district attorneys.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. Well, I know I only have you until 4, so I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the Nina Monique show. I greatly appreciate you coming on and dropping a whole lot of knowledge on us about, you know, being wrongfully accused in the process of what goes on when you're trying to be exonerated. And Alan,
Thank you.
no, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story and for taking the time out to come visit us. So on that note, we're going to take a break.